A currency no one was meant to keep. It began as a solution meant to disappear. A temporary currency, issued quietly, designed to move fast, absorb pressure, and then vanish without leaving a trace. Officials described it as a bridge, nothing more. But bridges are not meant to become destinations. And this one did. To understand why this currency mattered, we must return to a moment of quiet emergency. Banks were strained. Confidence was fragile. Cross-border payments slowed to a crawl as institutions hesitated, each fearing exposure to the next collapse. Leaders needed something immediate, something functional without being permanent. So they created a unit of value that was never supposed to survive scrutiny. The first reveal begins with its design. The currency had no physical form, no coins, no notes. It existed only as ledger entries between approved institutions. Citizens could not hold it. Businesses could not save it. It flowed invisibly between banks, settling obligations while remaining unseen by the public. Because no one could touch it, no one could panic over it. The second beat followed as the system expanded. What began as an internal settlement tool grew into a regional necessity. More institutions were granted access. More transactions depended on it. Soon, entire sectors relied on this hidden currency to clear payments that traditional systems could no longer handle quickly enough. It was efficient, it was quiet, and it worked. But something unexpected happened. Banks stopped wanting to let it go. The temporary unit offered stability without scrutiny, speed without debate. It bypassed politics, elections, and public trust entirely. For institutions exhausted by volatility, it felt like control. The bridge was becoming a refuge. And without any announcement, without any vote, a currency designed to disappear began to entrench itself at the heart of Europe's financial system. The entrenchment happened gradually, almost politely. No one declared the temporary currency permanent. It simply remained. Deadlines for its removal were extended, then quietly omitted. Institutions adjusted internal systems around it. Contracts referenced it as a default settlement unit. What had been an exception slowly became routine. As the reveal deepened, analysts noticed a strange imbalance. While public currencies fluctuated, the hidden unit remained remarkably stable. It was insulated from elections, headlines, and public sentiment. Because it existed only between institutions, it absorbed shocks that would have rattled visible markets. For banks and large firms, it became the safest place to operate. The conflict took shape when this stability began distorting behavior. Institutions delayed converting back into public currency, preferring to remain within the protected system. Liquidity pooled where visibility was lowest. Meanwhile, public markets felt tighter, more volatile, more unpredictable. Two monetary worlds had formed, one visible and fragile, the other invisible and resilient. Regulators grew uneasy. They had approved the currency as a temporary measure, not as an alternative foundation, but unwinding it now threatened disruption. Too many obligations were denominated in the hidden unit. Removing it abruptly would expose weaknesses the system had spent years concealing. Stability had become dependent on secrecy. Public officials attempted half measures. Reporting requirements increased. Oversight committees were formed. But the core issue remained untouched. The currency was never meant to be understood by citizens, and that opacity now protected it. Without public awareness, there was little pressure to change course. The buildup intensified when cross-border disputes arose. Some states accused others of exploiting the hidden currency to shield assets and bypass fiscal rules. Others argued it was the only thing preventing fragmentation. Trust between governments thinned, as no one could fully see how deeply the unit was embedded in each economy. Behind closed doors, a dangerous question emerged. If no one was meant to keep this currency, what would happen if no one dared to remove it? The tension broke when data finally revealed what secrecy had concealed. Economists studying settlement flows noticed that a majority of large interbank obligations no longer passed through public currencies at all. They were cleared almost entirely within the hidden unit. This was no longer a supplement. It was a parallel system, one that carried systemic importance without public consent. The conflict intensified as governments realized what this meant. Monetary policy lost traction. Interest rate adjustments failed to influence behavior trapped inside the invisible network. Stimulus measures leaked away before reaching the real economy. Leaders could announce decisions, but institutions no longer needed to respond. Control had shifted quietly, not to markets, but to architecture. Regulators demanded a timeline for dismantling the currency. Banks responded with warnings. Remove it too quickly, they said, and settlement would freeze. Supply chains would stall. Credit would vanish overnight. The threat was not empty. The hidden unit had become the spine of the system, breaking at risk paralysis. Public trust eroded further when fragments of this reality reached the press. Citizens learned that a currency existed they could never access, yet one that shaped their prices, wages, and pensions indirectly. The revelation felt like exclusion by design. Stability had been preserved, but only for those allowed behind the curtain. The build-up surged when a major institution refused conversion altogether, citing systemic risk. Others followed. What had been voluntary cooperation hardened into dependence. The temporary currency was no longer a choice. It was infrastructure, and infrastructure, once embedded, does not ask permission to remain. Europe now faced a paradox of its own making. The currency no one was meant to keep had become too important to discard, and too hidden to legitimize. The question was no longer whether it should exist. It was whether the system could survive if it ever stopped. The decision came not as a declaration, but as a quiet admission shared among those who now understood the stakes. The hidden currency could not be removed without breaking the system it had come to support. Yet leaving it untouched would continue to erode legitimacy, transparency, and democratic control. Europe stood trapped between collapse and concealment. The climax unfolded during an emergency summit convened under the banner of technical reform. Publicly, leaders spoke of efficiency and modernization. Privately, they confronted the truth. The temporary unit had solved the crisis by bypassing accountability, and in doing so, it had rewritten the balance of power. Monetary authority no longer rested solely with states or central banks. It lived inside protocols, clearing mechanisms, and institutional habits too complex for public scrutiny. Rather than dismantle the system, a different path emerged. The hidden currency would be brought into the open, not as a tool for citizens, but as a recognized layer of the financial architecture. Its rules would be codified, its volume disclosed, its role defined and limited. What had lived in the shadows would be exposed to oversight, even if it could never become fully public. The transition was delicate. Markets reacted nervously as disclosures revealed just how dependent the system had become. But transparency brought relief as well as fear. Regulators regained leverage. Policymakers could finally see where liquidity flowed and where it stalled. The invisible no longer dictated outcomes alone. The resolution did not restore the world that existed before the crisis. That world was gone the moment the hidden currency was created. But it did restore something more important, a boundary, a recognition that emergency tools must not become permanent powers without consent. The currency no one was meant to keep remained in use, but no longer untouched. It became a reminder etched into policy and memory alike. A lesson that solutions built in secrecy may work faster, but they carry a cost that grows with every day they remain unseen. Sometimes the smallest shift in perspective becomes the beginning of a new future. A currency